And today we have a very special video. I have Arden Lee here as a special guest. She's actually a seduction expert for women. Teaches women how to pick up men and also how to sort of get the relationship that they want, because a lot of times for women that's what it's really all about. Anyway, she has a lot of great insights. She's also very familiar with the pickup community and just all of our theories in general. So it should be a great interview. But just to get started, do you want to tell us a little bit about your particular background and where you're coming from?
Sure, absolutely. I started studying seduction around 2007 when, of course, the VH1 show came out, and I read The Game by Neil Strauss, who's now a pretty good friend of mine. And, I got into pickup. I don't think I ever intended to be an instructor. I got into pickup just because I wanted to learn how to improve my love life. Mm-hmm. And, the material that's out there for women is really tragic, a lot of it, mm-hmm. as I'm sure you know. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I read The Rules, I read Why Men Love Bitches, and all these books and He's Just Not That Into You, and all these books that basically said, that focused on what not to do. Don't call, don't text, don't be available the first time he asks you out, or the second or third time, and be as unavailable as possible and make him work for it. And don't approach a guy. Wait for whatever guy approaches you. And I tried all that, and the guys that I wanted just weren't approaching me. And I was basically like, am I supposed to get a great boyfriend just by sitting still? Because that hasn't worked for me so far. So when pickup came along, and I was a very late bloomer, like a lot of guys who, especially guys in the pickup scene who look at me now are like, well, she must have no, even women, too, are like, oh, she must have no problem. But I was a virgin until I was 22. Actually 22 and a half, because when you're a virgin at 22, you're like counting every month. You're like, please God, what happened this time? And I just, I had my heart broken so many times. I was falling for guys who were just completely unavailable to me for whatever reason. And it was just, there was a point in my life where I was like, this just has to stop. I can't live like this, you know? So along came The Pickup Artist on VH1 and The Game, and I read that, and I was like, wow, here's a bunch of guys who have developed a really practical, actionable strategy to approach women and build attraction with them. So I started studying, and like I said, I started going around to meetups. And what I started noticing was that I would go to, places like, Neil's book signings or stuff like that. And there were always a handful of women in the audience who were like, well, what can we do? What can women learn if we want to go out and pick up guys and improve our love lives? And I never, no offense, I never felt that the male pickup artists answered women in a satisfying way. Sure. It was either, well, wear makeup and go to the gym and just stand there and be hot, which again, from my experience, I can assure, doesn't always work. It's helpful, but it doesn't always get you the guy you want. If he hasn't noticed you in the first place, or if he's busy.
What is it when you're coaching women that you find to be the biggest sticking points and biggest hurdles that they have? Because I know for men what I see, but I'm sure it's a little bit different for women.
Yeah, I think women want to feel like they want to feel competent and powerful in getting the guy that they like to notice them, pay attention to them, and ultimately stick around. Whether it's for a traditional relationship or a non-traditional relationship, or even just getting the guy that they like, in the room. And I think we touched on this a little before about a guy going out and picking up who maybe just wants a 10. He wants to go out to a bar and just find a girl that he's physically attracted to, whereas a woman wants to go out and find someone who is socially proofed and is like the high value guy in the room. Maybe she wants the lead singer or the DJ or the artist at the exhibition or whatever it is. That way of being attracted to a guy who is the one who's surrounded, who's socially proofed, who's high value. For lack of a more descriptive term. So that's one of the ways that I think my coaching is different, is that women, I think, really want to be much more specific, whereas with a lot of guys in pickup, it's kind of a numbers game. It's like go out and get your 50 no's, before you get your one yes or whatever. Go out and get rejected, and it's a video game. Just start on your next life or whatever. Mm-hmm. And of course, obviously, the more skilled a pickup artist gets, the more he can be picky about it and be like, no, that's the girl I want, and I want to be I want to really refine and qualify, like genuinely qualify, not just qualify to build comfort and attraction, but qualify because I'm going to be picky. I think certainly that's the journey of almost every male pickup artist. But I think for women, it is about being more specific about their targets.
All right. So to you, in your experience as a woman, what constitutes a high value guy? What constitutes that guy that you go, wow, I want him?
For me, that means someone who, first and foremost, is successful at doing what he loves. I really am at a point in my life where I have a very hard time dating guys who are, waiters or, in any profession that they're not happy with, that they're frustrated by. I think that said, if someone was really passionate about being a bartender, was like, I'm into mixology and I create all these cool things and happy with it, that would be great. That would be really cool. But there has to be that satisfaction with what he does and to be successful at it. And that doesn't mean necessarily being wealthy, but it means that he has his shit together and he's at a place in his life where he's happy. I think also someone who's present, someone who's really able to relate well, who can really have a conversation with me and where I really feel like I'm being listened to, someone who asks interesting questions and you can tell they're really they're just there, I definitely used to have more of a physical type. I used to go for all kinds of really pretty goth boys. Kind of got over that phase now. It's since I've gotten over that phase, it's almost a little more difficult for me to tell who I'm attracted to at first because there aren't as many obvious physical tells. Now I'm like, oh man, now I have to get to know someone. I just sit there and talk to them, it's funny too. I think just building up some sort of any kind of reputation, any kind of, I don't want to say like fan club or whatever. It's just like
you respond to social proof, so to speak.
It's
in
social,
a technical way. It's
social proof, but it's kind of like, if I can't Google you and figure out what you're doing with your life, then what are you doing with your life? If you're, I had a girlfriend of mine who, used to say oh yeah, I Google everyone I date. If I Google you and nothing comes up, then what have you done with your life? Who are you? And I think that makes it easier for me also. I think one of the reasons I find that attractive is it's so much easier to find out what those people are about. And I really appreciate guys who are creative. It could be artistic or it could be, there's plenty of ways to create. It doesn't have to be artsy necessarily. But in evaluating and studying their work, I can find out more about what makes them tick.
As a girl, when you're meeting a guy and getting to know him, how do you assess whether A, you can trust him, and then B, whether you think that he will, be caring or be that way, as opposed to, I guess, the difference in evolution, like the high value guy versus the high value guy that actually cares and has those qualities?
Sure. I think I have two answers to that question. And one is that there are some guys who are high valued enough already that it kind of doesn't matter. It kind of just, I want to experience that person. Maybe they're, I've dated a lot of musicians. Maybe it's a musician I've seen on stage, and for whatever reason, there's something about him that is attractive and compelling enough that I'm like, okay, maybe we haven't even spoken yet. Maybe I've just seen him from on stage, but maybe I've been whatever that is that he's going on, I've got to explore that and I've got to see what that is. Sure. And unfortunately, sometimes that has ended up being disappointing because because I've mistaken my fantasy of that person for who they really are. But at the very least, I'm like, well, I found out and I sated my curiosity and, it was whatever. It was a fun experience. And the other thing, if there isn't that immediate attraction at the outset, certainly I don't need to tell you and your students how to build attraction with a woman. I think you know that part already. But I know that what I look for before I really open myself up physically to someone, if I do care about a relationship and if I do care about a degree of intimacy and trust that's going to happen there, I look for signs that he is invested in me non-sexually. So, for example, if he remembers things about me that have nothing to do with sex, if he remembers what my favorite band is and is like, oh, hey, your favorite band is playing in town next weekend, or hey, I clipped out this article about this photographer because I thought you would like it because you mentioned X, Y, and Z. Or, you know, my current lover gave me DVDs of a TV show that he was like, I think you'll get this. Like this reminded me of you.
Sure.
And it was like it was so uncanny. It was so jarring. It was like, wow, you're totally right. Like you've got me totally figured out, you know? And yeah, so that's definitely what I look for, those signs that, because honestly, I think a woman can tell if a guy is really just pushing a sexual agenda because it's kind of ersatz, you know, it's kind of, there's not a lot of real effort that's put into it because if you're, as a guy, if you're just looking to get laid, you know, you're going to throw out stuff that you could say to any girl, you know, the kind of typical, you know, well, there's a lot of attractive faces in here, like what makes you different, you know? And I've heard that before, and like that's fine for an initial pickup, an initial kind of like, let's get to know one another.
Sure.
But if there's going to be sex involved, I need to know that that guy gets me. And I need to see signs about that.
What advice would you give to a girl who is not like super, super attractive? I mean, like for a guy, I always tell him, you know, looks don't matter that much because you can convey a lot through your personality, you know, how you like women respond to power, those sorts of things. But for women, inherently as a man, I feel like that's kind of less true.
Yeah.
The looks do matter a bit more. So have you had clients that maybe don't name names or anything, but obviously who weren't as attractive or they had different obstacles to deal with? Sure.
But the thing about that is that, you know, sixes are like the love lives of sixes are still just as valid as the love lives of tens.
Sure.
And the sixes are going to be competing for other sixes, you know? So it's the same exact game. They might just be playing in a slightly different pool, you know? So they still want to learn that skill set. Even if they may be dating other people who are, you know, around the same attractiveness factor as they are.
Okay, so I want to talk to you about some pickup related stuff and some girl related stuff in pickup.
Definitely.
Things that like, 'cause I think, well, obviously based on execution and practice and what works, I kind of know the mechanics of things, but sometimes I don't know what's going on in the woman's mind that makes the mechanics work.
Okay.
So let's talk about shit tests.
Yeah.
Okay? When a woman gives a shit test, how conscious is she of what she's doing? Like, is she conscientiously saying, I'm testing this guy, or is it an instinctive biological thing that just comes out? Where does it come from?
That's a really good question. Because I'm sort of a faulty test case because because I do know the mechanics of it, and also because normally I'm the initiator. You know, I'm very, very difficult to pick up. The only people who have really been able to pick me up have done so with social proof, social circle mastery, and kind of getting in on my social circle and already being validated by people I know, or just making themselves so high value that I pursue them. You know, so that happens too. I don't think most women are aware that I don't think they're aware like of what a shit test is or that they're doing something, but I think there is.
You think it's like they feel nervous or unsure or distrusting in a certain way, and then that's what comes out naturally?
I think to a certain extent it's like, oh, is that your pickup line? I think that's their way of saying, is this you just looking to score with a hot girl at the bar, or is this really about me? You know, like, hey, let's be real, you know? And I think that's, in a weird way, I think that's a legitimate question. I'll literally sometimes like, and I'm sure this is, you know, on some level obnoxious even when I'm trying to be helpful, but there are some times that I've literally said to a guy, like, you're doing XYZ and this is not helping. Like, please, like, you're really cute. Please don't ruin this. You know? And yeah, if I am not interested in a guy, I just won't waste his time. I think there's part of me that's a little afraid of leading someone on because, you know, kind of the old adage of, you know, men are afraid that women are going to reject them and women are afraid that men are going to kill them. So you know, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I don't want to put out any mixed messages there and have some guy end up, because of my behavior, thinking that he's entitled to, you know, certain things with me or whatever, because that's just a bad, like, at best awkward and at worst, like, potentially violent situation. Sure. So I will just shoot guys down right away. And if I throw up bitch shield to someone, like, part of me wants to be like, dude, I'm just saving you time. Like, just don't waste your time. Just go. There's plenty of other girls in the bar. I don't mean to be a bitch to you, but just, I'm trying to be nice, like move on.
How do you reconcile the ideas of pickup as a girl, in the sense that, I mean, like, take, for example, my girlfriend works with me. She writes my article, some of my articles, helps me co-write them. She's a professional author.
Yeah.
And knows all of what we do. And in a lot of ways, she's really supportive of it. But even her, and even knowing me and loving me, certain times she's like, well, this is a little manipulative. So as a woman, as someone who knows pickup and someone who kind of like teaches pickup from the other side, how much do you think it is manipulative, and how much do you think manipulation is kind of okay? What's your just stance on all of that?
Yeah, I've had the M word thrown at me a few times. My response to that generally is like, we all have strategies to get what we want. And we've had them since we were babies, who learned that we needed to cry in order to be fed or held or whatever we needed. And over time, we have the opportunity to learn how to refine our strategies to be better at getting what we want. Or we can fall prey to the myth that anything other than whatever we naturally blurt out without thinking about it is honest and therefore somehow better.
Sure.
And I think that ethics are really important. I think that integrity is really important. I think it's important that your actions align with your intentions. I think it's important that you don't go out of your way to deceive someone. When I seduce someone, I am incredibly transparent about what I'm there for, you know?
What do you think are the biggest insecurities that women have? Because I know what men have. They're afraid to approach, they're afraid to do this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
But I don't deal with the women other than the reactions they give. So what are women afraid of? And when you coach women, do you tell them to do like cold approach, or do you tell them to like subtly get in the guy's eyesight, or how do you coach that?
I actually have, those are kind of two different questions. I'll try to answer them both. I actually have 3 different approach methods: indirect, semi-direct, and direct. So I teach all 3. And basically I want one of my students to have all 3 of those approaches in her kind of arsenal, so that she can apply whatever she feels most comfortable with or feels is best for the situation. There are some guys that you're going to need to direct approach because it's kind of the only way to get their attention.
Too shy to like do it.
Well, not just too shy, but they might be surrounded by people already. So actually, if someone's surrounded by people, I probably go semi-direct, which what I teach is, approach a friend, get introduced, oh, hey, like your friends look cool, do the polite thing and introduce me, or like whatever it is.
But if a girl came up to me super direct, I certainly wouldn't like reject it. I'd just be like, whoa, that was interesting. Have a seat, let's slow down and get to know each other, but I'm open to this, right? So it would work, but at the same time, like, whoa, did that just really, like, girls don't do that.
Yeah. And what's interesting is Dita Von Teese put out a video just on, like, YouTube or whatever not too long ago, where she talked about how much you, as a woman, you really do want to stand out from other women. And she said, which is why for her it's about like always wearing the vintage lingerie and the hair and everything, and maybe bathing in her lingerie and peeling off a stocking and throwing against the wall so it sticks or whatever. And she said, and those are just her kind of things that she does because they relate to her brand, of course. But she's like, the reaction you're going for is, oh my God, I've never met anyone like you before. I think the most heartbreaking thing for a woman is to feel like she's replaceable. A woman really wants to feel like she's unique and that she adds something to her guy's life that no other woman can give. So I think that's something that's really important. So when I throw off a guy like that, whether it's by a direct approach or perhaps how much I like to sort of like flip the gender roles and objectify him sexually, in a way that a lot of guys aren't used to, or whatever it is, like I like those moments that I kind of throw someone a little bit because you're just lighting up parts of their brain that don't normally get accessed.
So you mentioned 2 of the approaches. You said direct would be going straight to talk to them. Semi-direct would be talking to someone in their group. What would be indirect if semi-direct is already not talking to the person? Yeah,
indirect is let's say you and I are at a bar, and I would lean against the bar like this and play with my hair.
And all that.
Yeah, okay. And I'd wait until you looked at me, and then I'd wait until I caught you. And then I might look back and smile and, but kind of in a like, I caught you kind of way. Not in a I'm staring. Like I could go direct with just eye contact, but if I'm going direct with eye contact, I'm gonna do basically one of these. Like,
right.
I see you. I think you're attractive, and I'm confident enough in myself to admit, non-verbally, that I find you attractive. So yeah. that's the difference between those two.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so now back to the other part of the question, which is, what are women's biggest insecurities? What's going on in women's head when women are in their head?
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with their looks. You know, we place so much value on women's looks in society. And if you look at the kind of things that women do to increase their market value, you know, so to speak, you have women who will spend $10,000 on a boob job who aren't paying attention to their personalities, you know, and they put so much effort into that. And that's really, I think, like where, you know, it's like eventually the law of diminishing returns is going to kick in. You can't get that much hotter, but maybe you want to go like cultivate a hobby or read some books and be a little more interesting or whatever. So I think just those clues alone tell you that that is where a woman is insecure. And I think also, what a lot of times,
even if she has done the look stuff and is kind of lacking the personality department, she's still more likely to be insecure about the looks. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Well, that's another thing too. When you look at a person, you know, male or female, you never look at what they are. You look at what motivated them to become what they are. So if you see a woman who has put a whole lot of time and money into her looks, it's obviously something that she felt she had to do to be, you know, to look the way that she felt was going to be attractive. Mm-hmm. And I think it's actually like when you see a woman who hasn't put as much effort into herself, that she is more secure and more comfortable in herself and in her looks.
Okay, so you said that you actually will approach guys, which is commendable, and I wish more girls did it. But so say a guy wanted to be approached.
Yeah.
What would he have to do to merit a cold approach from an attractive woman?
The biggest thing for me is seeing evidence of a successfully creative lifestyle. So for a long time, I approached guys who were in bands, you know. Mm-hmm. I got to know a lot of the security at a lot of New York venues very well during those years, you know, and bake cookies, bring them backstage, and that was kind of like... It was kind of like the way that I dated and approached people for a little while. Mm-hmm. So again, it just helps to have something going on in your life. It helps to have, I think social proof is also good, you know. And I've approached people because I knew who they were, you know. Like it's like I realize how much that makes me sound like, you know, like a star fucker or whatever. But it's like a little bit. And I made a joke for a while, like where I was like, I'm not a star fucker. I just have no interest in sleeping with anyone I haven't heard of. Which, you know, I'm just making a joke about that. But the thing about that is that if you already have a reputation that precedes you, then I know something about you. Again, it's just like a shortcut. Sure. It's just me saying I am not wasting my time getting to know someone where I don't know what value they bring to the table already. So for me, it's just a shortcut to what I find attractive. But that could be any number of things.
So you mentioned physical attractiveness in that case. What about a guy who's just not that physically attractive? Let's say average looking or even like downright ugly. Yeah. What, if anything, can he do to attract really attractive women?
Words. Seductive language, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Robert Greene's The Art of Seduction, as I'm sure we all are, or you all should be anyway. And they do talk about, that man, Gabriele D'Annunzio, who was a very prolific writer and who was actually apparently downright ugly and who scored all these beautiful women because he had this way with words. And that's just so powerful.
How does a guy get close enough that the words matter?
Yeah. Certainly non-neediness is important, and social proof can be great too. And also being someone who is successful or, has whatever, again, working on your life, working on who you are and what you contribute to the world, and putting yourself in situations where you're going to meet those kind of people as well, of course, always helps. It also helps to have a reputation that precedes you. It's one of those things where, like, well, if everyone's ridden that roller coaster, it must be pretty good. That definitely helps too. And it's hard to say what the steps would be between, say, meeting someone and getting to the point where you could use that language.
It almost sounds like you'd have to meet their friends or something, or you'd have to just start out as friends and then work your way that way, or at least be perceived as starting out as friends, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Definitely like a sort of indirect kind of vibe going forward, I think is helpful. And I also think, again, maybe your reputation. Like you could have a guy who's really not attractive at all, but if he carries this vibe of being a sexual creature, of being someone who's been with a lot of women, then a lot of women will be kind of fascinated by that and be like, well, I wouldn't sleep with him, but what is it? And then like the minute you're like, I wouldn't sleep with that person, like they've already won because you're thinking about it. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, well, but I want to see what the fuss is all about. And then I'm going to get closer. And then it's like, oh, now I'm thinking about him more, you know?
Right. What would you say about the contention that a man's appearance has less to do with his appearance per se than his presentation, i.e. how he dresses, how he walks, how he carries himself?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think there's a lot more room for a man to be less attractive, say, facially, you know? And as long as he's taking care of himself in terms of his grooming and certainly his physical fitness and the way that he presents himself. Yeah, I think there's a lot more room for men than for women in that case.
So sometimes girls will look at a guy and be like, oh, he's cute, right? And then other times the girl will be like, oh, he's hot. Do you think that's just semantics, or do you think there's a fundamental difference in the way that the girl's looking at the guy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that every time someone says cute, it means one thing, and every time someone says hot, it means another. Like, I'm not going to be that semantically specific about it to make that generalization. But yeah, I think there is a difference between those two vibes. And that cute is that oh, he looks fun. He looks like relationship material. He looks like someone I want to get to know better, who could really probably grow on me. You know, they did like a study where, you know, they showed women photos of men, and there was certain, you know, they made them rate, you know, who looks like they'd be a good partner and who looks like they'd be a good one night stand. And there were those differences. So yeah, that is a real thing. And I think they controlled for, you know, finding out like what facial structure or height or whatever it was. And so, yeah, I'd say absolutely that's a real phenomenon. You know, the difference between being someone who looks like, you know, cute, being, I want to find out, I want to get to know him. He looks fun, playful. I could see myself, you know, maybe like he looks like a boyfriend kind, and just being like, oh my God, that guy's hot. And I just want to have that carnal experience with him. Yeah.
Sure. In my experience, that's behavioral as well. Because I've had a lot of situations where a girl is clearly ready to just go home with me, and then I'll start getting to know her a little bit better. I'll like say something that's kind of impressive about my career, or I'll say something kind of intimate about my childhood or something like that. Yeah. And all of a sudden you get this switch go off in her head. She was like ready to go home and sleep with me. She's like, now I want a date. And she's like, let's go on a date. I'm like, oh my God.
You're like,
just
no.
really... have you ever done that? Where like you were like thinking, this guy's hot, I want to have sex with him. And then at some point you're like, wow, this guy's like really cool person too. Let me take it slower to get him. Or would you just be like, you know what, I'll have sex with him and then we'll see how the chips fall later?
That's a really good question. I think I've been in both of those situations. I think I've been in some situations where I've thought this is definitely a person I want to keep around in my life, and I I want to look for those signs of investment, and I don't want to sleep with him and potentially ruin things right away. I want to, or sometimes even like I'm attracted to him, but I don't want to rip his clothes off yet. And for the sake of my own pleasure, I want to get to the point where I've kind of teased myself enough that I do want to rip his clothes off, you know?
Have you ever had one-night stands where you literally just have decided it's a one-night stand, you would be happier not seeing them again after?
Well, after I decided I was happier not seeing them again. I don't think so.
Really?
I think whenever I'm going to be sexual with someone, I have to at least suspend my disbelief.
Okay.
And
I think well put.
Yeah. And at least sell myself on a fantasy that there's something really meaningful with this person, you know, even if it's not a traditional relationship.
Sure.
Maybe it's just a grand affair or whatever, but maybe I'll be longing for them for the rest of my life or whatever. I think I have to convince myself of that in order to make that sex fun and meaningful.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I would agree with that from my own experience about 90% of the time.
Yeah.
So what is it that will put a guy in that category of one night stand fantasy guy versus, you know, could be something long term? What are the criteria, the factors that make that distinction?
I think for me, the one night stand thing is, I feel so slutty saying this. I think it's a little bit about conquest, you know? Mm-hmm. So when I go into something and I'm like, I'm prepared for this to just be a one night stand and it is what it is, it's a matter of, I want to take this opportunity to have sex with this person now, even if it means jeopardizing things in the long run, because I want to say that I had sex with this person for my, not that I want to brag about it online or anything, mm-hmm. but like I want to set for my own edification. I want to give myself this experience. So that happens a lot with like, you know, the band guys, you know, mm-hmm. the guys that I idolize from afar. I'm like, I want that experience. And if they don't stick around, it will have been worth it. Whereas the guy that I want something long-term with is like, this guy has real potential and I really don't want to lose this chance, you know?
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that the guys will judge you different, like the long-term guys, they would judge you differently if you did have sex with them the first night?
A little bit sometimes, yeah. I feel like there is some, but that's not really the main reason. Again, the main reason is about stoking that fire and that intimacy to really build that tension to the point where there's like something way different about sex with someone that you're idolizing, that you've just met and you want to have that experience with, between that kind of sex and the sex where you've gotten to know someone, you've had that goodnight kiss and you go home and you're like, oh, damn, that was the right thing to do, but wow, I wish they were here in my bed right now. Mm-hmm. And then you masturbate and you think about them. And that, like, even that alone, I think builds up that kind of oxytocin, you know? Mm-hmm. And, oh man, if I have an experience where a guy turns me down for sex, like mm-hmm. where he gives me, you know, I got the line from a guy once where, you know, he was clearly interested in me, but he was like, well, you know, I have an early morning tomorrow and I'm not a sprinter, I'm a marathon runner. And I'm like, I'm like, don't you know I wore my nice underwear tonight? I'm kidding, all my underwear is nice. But there's that like, wow, that just drives me insane. Like, there's almost nothing that will get me hornier for a guy than if like I give him the green light for sex and he's like, I really like you, but let's wait a little while. And it's so, I hate it. It's so frustrating. I can't believe I'm telling you guys this. Don't do that to me. It's awful.
Because of your experiences and the things you've done, probably are much more sexually comfortable and competent probably than most women. Do you think for a woman that would be less versed in sex and maybe less confident overall, that tendency to prefer a dominant man would be even more pronounced?
It's possible. I think it does take a lot of confidence to be a dominant woman.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the less confident a woman is sexually, the more important it is for a man to be comfortable with sex. Because it's kind of that, you know, the strongest frame wins thing. Mm-hmm. If you can go into a sexual experience being like, yeah, this is cool, this is fun, this is no pressure, you know, comfortable, whatever, then the more you're going to make that woman feel comfortable and feel okay, you know, and the more she's going to be able to open up. And again, not feel those insecurities about like, how do I look? Or, I mean, she'll probably still feel them, but it'll be less of a big deal because it doesn't feel like there's so much pressure.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, both people are uncomfortable. The vibe's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, sure.
Right, cool. So being involved with the pickup community and having our relationships and being known as pickup artists one way or another, I've always been in relationships that have been non-monogamous, always been sort of dating multiple people, or currently I'm dating someone who I have threesomes with and dating multiple people. But so I haven't had a lot of traditional relationships. And as a guy, I find that's a very appealing concept and very appealing thought to a lot of guys. But I haven't found as many women who that's their primary sort of view of a relationship. But in talking with you, you have been in a lot of non-monogamous relationships. So how do you view that type of relationship as a woman?
Yeah, I just think that maybe partly it's the crowd that I hang out with because the sex educator scene overlaps a lot with the kink scene, overlaps a lot with the poly scene, and you just get that feeling that it is a lot more normal. So maybe it's the people I hang out with. But I think also we're seeing a big swing toward non-monogamy in general. Even Dan Savage coming out and coining the term monogamish, where it's kind of like, yeah, which is probably the closest to what I am. I consider myself a primary-oriented non-monogamist, which means I want one person who's my partner, who's my primary, but I am not threatened by not being bound by strict monogamy sexually. Partly because I think we all can acknowledge that love and sex are not the same thing. But people conflate them so often, and they're like, you cheated on me. How could you? Don't you love me? Yes, I love you. I still wanted to fuck someone else. Wanting to fuck someone and loving them are not the same thing. But we know this. Why are we still mixing those things up? And I think that, honestly, first of all, I think that monogamy is just a lot less realistic than people think it is, because we see cheating all the time. We see divorce, So would I love for me to be the only person that my current lover wants to sleep with for the rest of his life? Yeah, that would be ideal. But it's not realistic because, again, just because you want to fuck someone doesn't mean that you love them. You might just want to experience that, experience sexual intimacy with a person without being in love. And I think that trying to constrict that, trying to fence someone in and keep him bound by a promise, by an obligation, like you gave me your word, you're never going to stick your penis in anybody else. I think that is a lot more dangerous than letting someone have that room to play and experiment and trusting that he's going to come back to me because that person does love me, because, again, sex and love are not the same thing. Hopefully, when you love someone, there is obviously sex, but, it's like a square is a rectangle is not a square. And I would much rather, a partner that I'm with, if he's out and an opportunity presents itself to him, I would rather he be able to take that opportunity and say, isn't it cool that I have an awesome girlfriend who is secure enough that I can go and do this and have this experience for myself and know that I'm going to return to her, rather than saying, oh, God damn it, this girl is really hot and I know I can hit it tonight, but I have a girlfriend. And having that resentment slowly build up. And truthfully, I say this, thus far I've answered this question about, a man's desire to have sex. But truthfully, I've had that desire too. Like, I've been in that situation. And I've found that in being both in monogamous relationships and non-monogamous relationships, when I'm not able to scratch that itch with a person, it festers and it grows. And then this fantasy grows in my head where I'm like, this person whom I've not been able to be intimate with, and therefore I don't know all their little quirks and flaws, looks so perfect because I can't be with them, as opposed to my current partner who is maybe not meeting all my needs and who, like, I'm seeing his flaws up close. So I'm idolizing this other person and fantasizing about a relationship with this person would be so much better. Whereas when I'm non-monogamous and I get to go and experience that person, like, almost every single time, like 201, it's been like, that was fun, but I miss my partner,
Sure. So when we were talking about relationships, you mentioned having threesomes, which is something I've been doing a bit myself. Is that something you've done a lot of, or is that like kind of a new thing you're experimenting with? Where are you at with that?
Well, I had my first serious relationship, my first long-term relationship with, in a dungeon, in an S&M club where I was a dominatrix and I was dating my boss. So while I don't think we ever actually had an official threesome together, like in terms of actually having sexual intercourse with another party involved, but there was a lot of like kink play that went on. So there was another young woman who worked at the dungeon who would sometimes like co-top me with my boyfriend. And having that kind of kink play without actual sex going on. And a lot of parties we went to where maybe there was sex happening and maybe we were with each other, in public, even though we weren't hooking up with other people. But it all felt pretty comfortable. So I think by the time I had my first threesome, I think I might have even had like a foursome before I had a threesome. It
two
all
couples together.
Yeah, well, no, actually it was me and a girl that I wanted to hook up with, and she was like, Arden, you're too straight. I'm not taking you home. We have to get some boys. And I was like, fine, you can bring them, but it's you that I want, and they were just kind of props. I think they were kind of like, how did this happen to us? So I was like, fine, you want them? You don't want them? They're like standing there being like, like they hit the jackpot or something. That was kind of funny. But I think that threesomes, oddly enough, yeah, I enjoy like bringing like friends that I trust into the bedroom. Like there's something very sexy about like showing off my lover to my friends or showing off my friends to my lover or vice versa. Because you do feel kind of safe, because if your friends are people you trust, hopefully, then you kind of feel those sparks of jealousy in an environment where you're not actually threatened. And that can be very sexy. And this is going to sound really weird, but having threesomes, bringing in more people, almost like kind of sourcing or vetting people to bring in, actually makes me feel more secure, because then I can service my lover's need for variety in a way that I'm kind of in control.
Yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah, because I can't do that just by myself as a single person. So if I can do that, then I feel like there will be less of a chance of him going out and needing to fill that need for variety himself.
Do you ever worry that with bringing, well, actually, here's a better question. How do you bring your friends into that? Like, what kind of frame do you put on it to get them there?
Well, I mean, I think I just have a lot of friends who are really comfortable with sex. Like,
yeah. It sounds like you've been around that kind of environment a lot. So
exactly. I've been, I have a lot of friends who used to be DOMs. Now that I'm in LA, I have a lot of friends who are porn stars. The last girl that I slept with, we met through mutual friends, so there was an element of social proof there, and we followed each other on Twitter for a little while before I moved, so I kind of got to know her a little bit through that. But then, like, literally, we were like, oh, we should hang out sometime and stuff like that. We ran into each other at a party, and she was like, oh my God, Arden, I can't believe you're here. I was like, oh, so good to see you. And she's like, do you want to fuck sometime? And I was like, yes, please. It was just like, it was just so cute.
Okay, so what do you think are the elements that would make a seduction great?
For me, wow. Definitely paying attention. I can give you the things that for me personally do it for me, but I think every woman is different, and paying attention to the things that inspire her, paying attention to the literature, like her favorite films, the books on her shelf and stuff like that. For me, someone who is willing, what a lot of guys don't do that's really a shame, is a lot of them feel too insecure to really commit to fantasy.
All right, just to close, what advice would you give to guys that you don't think like the pickup community teaches them properly? Like, if there's anything that we miss a lot that you wish every guy could know, what would it be?
Yeah, oh, gosh. The first thing is work on yourself and being an attractive person. Like, you can learn, like, even if you're the best approacher in the world, like, I don't think there's any woman who wants to date a boyfriend, like wants to like a boyfriend who's like, his claim to fame is he's like the world's best approacher. Like, I'm the world's best cold approach artist, and also, again, don't be afraid to commit to fantasy. Even if it may feel feminine, go see Twilight, read 50 Shades. I don't even like 50 Shades of Grey, but clearly there are a lot of women who do. Read the fantasy material that women are reading. Go see those movies, like that's like your cheat sheet, They're all looking for a kind of fantasy figure that appeals to them in that way. Don't be afraid if it's a little bit feminine. It's still deeply seductive. And finally, just really listen to what women are saying, give them space to say what they want to say, understand that they might not always have the power to articulate everything that they want to say, but really create that space for it to be safe for them to open up and listen for the things that they're not saying. I give that advice to women too. Yeah. Listen a lot, and they'll tell you. If they have a blog, read it. Look for clues. Yes. If you want to seduce me, read my book.
Yes. That's awesome. That's awesome advice. Awesome advice throughout, and I think really eye-opening in a lot of ways.
Cool. I'm glad it was helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your time. And
thank you. It was a pleasure. Absolutely.